And he wants to know, what is the meaning of Ecclesiastes 3:21?
Yeah, and for those of you who don't have your Bible memorized completely, Ecclesiastes 3:21 in ESV says, "Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth?" Question mark. Again, this rhetorical question. I think in a nutshell, the point of the verse is that human beings are mortal just like the beasts. Okay. If you go back, to verses 19 and 20, the couple of preceding verses, you read, something to the effect that all of them, both human and animal, all have the same breath. Everything is meaningless, says the writer, Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, the preacher. All go to the same place. In other words, they all go to the grave. Everything dies. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Then we get this statement, well, who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down to the earth. So the real question here is, the author is wondering if any people, wind up being taken out of the grave, out of Sheol, because everything goes there, everything dies, which is pretty self-evident. And this verse is part of the whole discussion in the Old Testament about Sheol, because, everybody dies and everything dies. So on my website, years and years ago, boy, it's I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, whenever it was, I went through a series on Sheol and the human dead versus the non-human, spirits, that are in, Sheol, and who's in Sheol and all that kind of stuff. And so we discussed broadly, this whole topic, but this verse in particular is part of that complex of ideas. And, what you get as you read through the Old Testament is you get this notion born of reality that everybody dies. And then there's this sort of question like, well, then what? Because even in Sheol, you have this conscious life going on. People would say, I'm going to go be with my fathers. Well, that reflected the idea that you would rejoin, your family members. People were buried. We talked about Old Testament view of the afterlife. And again, I'm one that doesn't think that Israelites thought there was nothing going on or soul sleep or anything like that, because people would be buried with things that they used in life, under the assumption, that they would use them in the next life. I mean, Israelites weren't any different than lots of other cultures in this respect. People just anticipated to have some sort of existence. But if you were a Mesopotamian, you would sort of view this existence as kind of cadaverous, nothing really good. If you were an Egyptian, you viewed it a little bit differently, depending on which era of Egyptian history and the theology that went with it was in. Sometimes the positive afterlife was just for the pharaoh and whoever he granted it to. But eventually it widens, to more people. And Egyptians were, quite noteworthy for their positive outlook of the afterlife. So, Israel's part of this mix. When it comes to the biblical writers, again, there's in some passages there's a question. Well, we don't really know what's going to go on. And in other passages, it's actually positive that there are Old Testament passages. And again, in that series I did on my website, you could look them up. But there are Old Testament passages that have a positive view of the afterlife, because it's anticipated, or at least hoped for, that the righteous, those who have a right relationship with Yahweh, the God of Israel, the God of the Bible, would be removed from Sheol. Yes, everybody goes there, but the righteous are going to be removed from it. So that the writer of Ecclesiastes is sort of in that mix. Ecclesiastes is kind of an unusual book to begin with, because parts of it are really cynical and pessimistic, and other parts of it are optimistic. And so scholars always discuss Ecclesiastes with the question, well, is it a pessimistic book or is it an optimistic book? And it's some of both. And again, this question kind of reflects that. I want to read something from Provan about this particular passage. He wrote a commentary on Ecclesiastes. It's in the NIV application commentary series. So, looking up Provan here, he writes, "The one place to which all the living go is Sheol. the world of the dead. For example, Job 30:23, the place appointed for all the living. In other words, all the living are eventually going to be among the dead. They're going to die. It's translated in the NIV simply as the grave in Ecclesiastes 9:10. The Old Testament often speaks of death as if it were a final ending to human existence, a place of separation from God. And he gives a few Psalms here, Psalm 6:5, 88:10 through 12. It's a place of separation from God that the righteous as well as the wicked will experience as darkness and chaos, and from which they will not return. Again, everybody dies. You're not going to. There was no sense that when you died, well, maybe you'll be undead at some point. Again, that wasn't a question, just like it is for us, on one level anyway. Other texts, however, tell us that the wicked depart to Sheol. Psalm 9, verse 17, Psalm 31:17. Implying that the fate of the righteous is ultimately, if not immediately, different. A point explicit in Psalm 49:13 through 15, where the righteous are ransomed from Sheol's power. And he has a cross-reference here to Psalm 16:10 and 11. Job 14:13 pictures Sheol as a place in which God might hide Job until his wrath has passed, the passage envisaging a later time when God will remember him and the dead will be roused out of their sleep. That's also Job 14:12, and also verses 14 through 17, the same chapter. And of course, the famous Job 19:25 through 26, that's the I know my Redeemer lives passage. In passages like Isaiah 26:19 and Daniel 12:2 and 3, moreover, there are clear references to resurrection from the dead. That's the end of Provan's quote. So in other words, there are clear references to being removed from Sheol. Now, the writer of Ecclesiastes here is sort of expressing either a non-committal ignorance or a pessimism. That's reflected by his words, well, who knows if, so on and so forth. Provan elsewhere says, the writer cannot be certain what will happen after death. It is unseen. He rests content with that which, in the grace of God, he has come to see, namely that death renders pointless during life the quest for gain or advantage over the rest of creation. So it's the end of the second quote there. So Provan is saying, the writer, at the very least, he's sort of saying this in the context of the fact that everybody dies and death is ultimately going to sort of be the great leveler. And so why should we waste our lives, after ill-gotten gain and taking advantage of other people, so on and so forth? Because he's going to end the book with, this is the conclusion of the whole matter, fear God and keep his commandments. But during the course of Ecclesiastes, he asks questions like this and expresses either pessimism or some sort of cynicism. Now, another way to look at this is, or at least part of the discussion of this kind of statement in Ecclesiastes is the whole issue of progressive revelation. Why would we assume, this is important, because as people are listening to this, they might be thinking, well, shouldn't the writer of Ecclesiastes know that the righteous go to heaven, and why is it even a question? Well, it's a question because not every biblical writer sort of would have known at the same time. This is, if you think about it, we're fond as evangelicals of sort of touting the Bible as this book, collection of 66 books written over a couple millennia and all this kind of stuff. Well, it is all that, but all those people obviously didn't live at the same time. Why would we expect that all biblical writers had the same grasp of some point of theology if they all lived over the course of a couple millennia? Why would we expect that they all had the same knowledge pool in their heads to draw from? That's an unrealistic and frankly an unbiblical assumption, but it's a common one, for the average, church person, because, well, their writings show up in the Bible, so they all believe the same thing, right? Well, maybe when you meet, if you could assemble them all in heaven, well, then there'd be agreement. But in real life, in real time, there are doctrines even within the Bible itself that develop, that grow, that get accrued to. It's not just one knowledge dump in Genesis 1, and then everybody sort of knows the same thing, throughout the course of human history and all that. Again, this question, again, like so many others, sort of dovetails and is influenced by what I have contested on many occasions to be a deeply flawed view of inspiration. the one that sort of eliminates the humanity from it. And in this case, there's just no reason to expect biblical writers to have the same grasp of really any given subject at the same time, especially when they lived in such a broad range chronologically. Revelation, information from God, is given over time. It's a self-evident thing, but it's something that, again, evangelicals often don't think about at all. But it's true. Material is added to theological threads. Part of our job as Bible students is to trace the threads. Anyone living after the time of the writer could provide a better answer because they had more revelation. People living further down the road, like let's just say in the New Testament, are going to be able to answer certain questions better than certain people in the Old Testament, just by definition, because revelation is given progressively. As just another example, or I guess a related example here. In the Mosaic Era, the dead, you see this phrase, the dead go to be with their fathers. Again, this afterlife notion with loved ones. That's different than the wording here in Ecclesiastes 3:21 about going up. Okay, remember Ecclesiastes 3:21. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth. Well, we know that everybody's spirit goes down into Sheol, but the question is, does the spirit of man, go upward? That up language is different than I'm going to die now, I'm going to go be with my fathers. Because people they had different ways of expressing the notion of an afterlife, but here you have this directional element that sounds to our ear more like heaven. So, and I think there is this sort of God attachment to the upward language as opposed to just a general afterlife, with loved ones kind of feel that you get in the Torah, for instance. So you have certain ideas that in parts of Scripture are going to conform to the upward language, other ideas that are going to conform to the, again, positive afterlife expectation, but not necessarily this upward orientation. Fox, in his commentary on Ecclesiastes, Michael Fox was my advisor at Wisconsin, he writes this. He says, the writer is aware of the belief that at death the soul goes upward to the heavens rather than down to Sheol. So he's aware of the idea. This idea is not Semitic in origin, but it was found in popular Hellenistic religion, which held that the soul arises to the ether, the heavenly seat of the gods. Now, I would actually quibble with that because of the Psalms language about being with the Lord. Having the Lord take you out of Sheol. Well, if the Lord takes you out of Sheol, where is he going to take you? He's going to take you to be with him. And he's in the heavens, and so that would be upward. So I think Fox is giving in a little bit too quickly to this Hellenistic idea. Now, as the writer of Ecclesiastes portrays things, Fox says, the sage, again, the writer has heard of this notion, but he doesn't know for sure if it is true, and he refuses to be comforted by the conjecture. Again, I think it's a bit overstated. Is it really a lack of comfort, or is he just being sort of cynical? Or is he just saying, hey, I don't know? Again, those are three related but different things. So I read Fox here because that he's kind of the broad consensus kind of position on this. But Provan, again, is a little more positive because of the language in the Psalms. And again, it stands to reason if God is going to take you out of Sheol, he's going to take you to be with him. And that is a pre-Hellenistic, and it is a Semitic idea. So I wanted to throw that in to address, again, the consensus thinking. Consensus thinking, I would say, is not terribly coherent, at least in its consistency. Now, as time goes on, the two ideas of positive afterlife, in some sense, not being left in Sheol, that idea, and then this upward with God kind of orientation, those two ideas are fused in the Second Temple period, in the New Testament, and their joining is logical from the Old Testament. Again, what other source of ongoing life would there be but with God? So this is a good case, and I think you have instances like the doctrine of Satan, a few other things in the angelological and demonological sphere that the Second Temple period literature and the New Testament will say things that they'll essentially take data points from the Old Testament and then connect the dots. But the dots are not connected in the Old Testament. They're connected later. But the connection points, the data itself, the data that themselves are quite consistent with the Old Testament because the Old Testament is their source. And the connections that are made are coherent and logical. It's just that you don't find the connections. You don't find the picture, the mosaic in the Old Testament. You find it later. And I think this is kind of an example of one of those sorts of topics.